fantastic. And we talk a lot about that, Andrew. We think a lot about the myth of life balance. We don't think about it, the balance. We think about much more about the integration of life rather than the balance of it. So I think that's a really fantastic piece. Sam, I know one of the things that really matters a lot to you, if you follow Sam on Strava, you know that it matters a lot to him, is health. So I'm going to hand you over to you to really introduce your thought on that and get Andrew to deep dive a little bit more into that principle of health.
Sure. And I think I've always liked the quote, the first wealth is health. And we can look at people like Steve Jobs, they're amazingly successful, life-changing, but if you haven't got, you can have all the money in the world, everything, but if you haven't got your health in place. And so I know that Andrew has been through his own ups and downs with health and is one of the healthiest people I know in terms of the congruency audio and video. And do you want to tell us a little bit more about health and your rituals and why you feel that's so important, Andrew?
Well, there's so much you can't control. Like, there's so much we can't control, but we do know one thing, and that's that we're all going to die. So knowing that in mind, I think it's essential to live with that realization every single day, to recognize that every day is a gift. And so, as I mentioned, there's so many factors that you can control, and there are several factors that you cannot control. Components of your genetics, for example, you may not be able to do anything about that. But what you can do is you can try to stack the odds in your favor. So things like getting a decent amount of sleep, getting a decent amount of rest. This is where your body repairs itself. So Sam, too, as an athlete, you would know this. When you train to do something physically, all you're doing is you're breaking your body down. That's what training is. Training isn't getting stronger. Training means you are breaking your muscles down. But it's the rest after that activity where the rebuilding takes place. So that whole concept of health isn't that person that has to, or you don't have to exercise like an absolute mad demon. Moderate exercise, research has shown, is actually more beneficial than extreme exercise by giving yourself those opportunities to rest, thinking too of your body as, well, it's the only vessel you have. So what are you actually putting into it? So for me personally, and this might sound really extreme, but Sam, yeah, you and Mick mentioned, or you mentioned the ups and downs of my personal health journey. And like I say, we can't control everything. In 2008, I was 38 years old, and I was relatively fit. I ended up competing in a race in Singapore. It's called the JP Morgan Corporate Challenge. There were 14,000 people in the race. Essentially, anyone with a job could enter it. And I ended up being the oldest winner in the race's history. So I was able to do 5-minute miles back to back to back to back as a 38-year-old. And without realizing it, I actually had cancer. So the year I won it, I had bone cancer. It was one of those things that was completely out of my control. I ate well. I rested well. I was a relaxed guy. It got lots of sleep, but still this thing hit me. And so it was one of those moments where afterwards I said to myself, all right, now, what am I going to do to try to ensure that, or at least give myself the strongest odds that I'm not going to get cancer again in the future? What am I going to do to ensure that my vessel, the vessel that I'm born with, has the best statistical odds of lasting as long as possible? So for me, I looked at things that cancer really likes. What is cancer like? Well, cancer likes stress. So if you can meditate, spend a little bit of time, even if it's just a couple of minutes a day, this is essential. It just seems like it's nothing, but just taking that time, even if you're in traffic, you're in a car. I knew somebody that was, they would sit at red lights, and even taking a few seconds at a red light just to try to bring their body down into a calm mode, just to take a few deep breaths. So researchers suggest a couple of minutes a day. Here's where it gets really extreme, and a lot of people will listen to me and say, oh, Andrew, you're completely crazy for this. But I found that cancer likes sugar. And so again, I know this is really extreme, but like Nick, if you said to me, "Hey Andrew, here's a can of Coca-Cola. I'm going to give you $1,000 to drink it," I wouldn't drink it. And so I know how this all works. I mean, that sounds super extreme, but I know how it works. And if I have some cells in my body that are just tweening, like they're just on that edge, and I don't know it, and they're just potentially ready to form a tumor, I think that if I end up in a hospital bed, I want to know that I at least did what I could. And I may be haunted by, if I end up drinking that can of Coke. And I know it's extreme. I don't know too many cancer survivors who are as extreme as I am in this respect. But for me, it's just, what can I control? I'll control what I can control, and I'm going to be really relaxed about all the stuff that I can't control. So again, back to that health, and again, it's so interconnected with all of these other components too, with the relationships that you have with other people, with money, with your sense of purpose. I can see, Sam, you're on the edge of your seat because you're going to say something brilliant.
Absolutely not. I'm just so excited. I love all of these areas.
Yeah, and
That's my favorite topics.
And that was a great reason that we've got you in. I know that David Labouchere, our fantastic executive coach, who actually runs our Thursday boot camp that Sam and I were missing today because we're here with you, will be delighted to hear about sugar. He calls sugar the world's #1 killer, and a really interesting piece. And one of the things that we really stress, Andrew, and so congruent with our philosophy, is I love the fact I'm going to die, because it makes me live. I don't expect to buck the trend. You know, there's been a pretty strong trend around the world around dying. It comes to all of us. So it's not about not dying, it is about living. And that's the other thing I love about your philosophy around health and well-being and how important that is. Are there any other health and well-being fundamentals that you are really strong around, that you think are critical? And control what you can control. The #1 factor in resilience, obviously, is control what you can control. Any other insights around health and well-being that you think are really important? And then I'm going to throw at you at the end the great quote by the Dalai Lama around meditation, which I love.
I think just the importance of recognizing the interconnectedness of everything as it relates to health and as it relates to your relationships. So with your health, research suggests that married people live longer. People who have good friendships and good social networks live longer. They end up healthier. There's something fascinating called the Rosetto effect. And there was a small town in the United States where researchers had found that people in that town didn't typically get heart disease at young ages. It wasn't until much later that people came out with the same kind of ailments and diseases that was hitting the general population at much younger ages. So people in this particular town were living much longer. So researchers came in to look at this little town. It was called Rosetto. So they wanted to see, well, what is it about this place? And they tested the water. First, one of the things, they tested the water. What is the water like? Well, the water was exactly the same as the water in the next town and the town after that. And so it had nothing to do with the water. Well, okay, what are they eating? And one thing too, I think, Nick, about health, and I've come full circle on this because as a cancer survivor, I researched like crazy in terms of, right now, what supplements do I need? What do I best need to eat and to put into my body? What do I best need to drink? And a lot of that, ironically, things like supplements, research really shows that a lot of that is a complete waste of time. Eat healthy foods, loads of green leafy vegetables. If you can have them organic, fantastic. That's even better, especially if they're really organic. You live on a farm or nearby a farm, so you know exactly who is growing them, how they're growing, that sort of thing. But to control what you can control, and a lot of that is not to obsess about things that don't matter that much. Things like vitamins don't matter as much as things like your relationships. So back to Rosetto. They really couldn't discover, they really couldn't find what it was until they recognized that this town was especially tight. So they had an open door policy where people wandered in and out of each other's homes. They had 26 civic community clubs, but the town only had 2,000 people. Everybody was involved in something. They cooked together. They laughed together. They celebrated together. They walked together. They were outdoors. And what happened was by the mid 1980s, some of the younger people in Rosetto started to get a taste of the American dream. Before that, yeah, there were some people who had more money than others in Rosetto, but they chose not to drive flashier cars than their neighbors. They chose not to buy grander homes than their neighbors. They thought that was distasteful. So they wanted to live and put their relationships first, not one-upmanship ahead of that. But the new generation did catch hold of the American dream. And when they ended up with more money, they wanted to build bigger houses, drive better cars. They moved away from the nucleus of the town. And they stopped that interaction that they had when the families first came over from Italy a couple of hundred years before. And that's what it was. It were just these old-fashioned Italian values that they brought with them to that town of Rosetto. And then predictably, what ended up happening was by 1980, or by about 1990, mortality rates in Rosetto climbed to the point where today, Rosetto still exists, but it's just like any other town. So, you know, when you look at blue zones, I know that one of the first studies that I read the China study on longevity, and it was suggesting that vegetarianism was really the way to go. And research does back vegetarianism over red meat eating. It does. However, what I found really fascinating is that when we identified different parts of the world where people lived a long time, known as blue zones, they found that what people ate actually didn't matter as much as their connections within the communities, much like with Rosetto. So in the Nicoya Peninsula of Costa Rica, for example, they're meat eaters. They eat a lot of meat, but they're a lot like those people in that American town of Rosetto, where they interconnect with each other. They've got this fabulous community and social fabric. So really, if you want to do the best that you can for your health, set aside time to spend with people you love. Set aside time to have laughs with your friends, because research suggests this is the greatest benefit to your health, the greatest benefit you can have.
Yeah, and there's a couple of pieces in there. I love the part, and I said to you that I would throw it out at you, the great quote by the Dalai Lama, who said, if you can't find 10 minutes a day to meditate, you probably should be doing 3 hours of it. And I really always really love that quote about creating space. And obviously, as an executive coach, a massive job for us is creating space for people that it's the space between the notes that makes the music. And so that creating space around that